preliminary, but Cooper is going to do this open records training presentation. And I'm also available for any questions, but I expect you to grill him and make sure he knows his stuff.
And as you can tell, we're a very serious group up here.
Super serious.
It is a serious issue. It is a serious issue. Yeah. So give it your best. And Jen has kindly made popcorn for everyone to enjoy during
I
our
have a
presentation.
plain popcorn, I have nutritional yeast popcorn, do not knock until you try it.
Oh, I use it.
And then a tahini popcorn, which is like, don't knock until you try it. So, you guys, nutritional yeast is really good. Tahini is really good. It's like a Mexican spice with like lime.
Oh.
It's really good with popcorn.
Give us a minute to dish up. And
I do tahini on everything.
do you need
Nutritional
to
yeast.
connect to the?
You can, or I talked about it with Cooper, up to you. Everyone has the
Yeah, as long as everybody has a
Packets.
package, I'm comfortable just talking.
Because you're not going to read the slide.
Well, it's a good guide.
All right. I'm passing it over. You guys are available. You don't want to do popcorn?
I don't need
Oh, it is kind of weird.
Walter got some popcorn.
This is my nutritional food. Thank you very much.
So I was like, you guys are
I got Cooper right here.
Sure, just anywhere.
That's nutritional
Yeah.
This is plain.
Spelled a little different.
Where's it?
Oh, it's tahini. There should be, oh. Anybody else want to?
She can pass.
You gotta have some fun when you get scanned.
Take one down, pass it around.
There's the tahini. Anybody else want tahini? You want tahini? Tahini's powder. Tony, what do you think? You sure? We have lots. That's fine. You want any?
Yes.
You want nutritional yeast or tahini?
Or plain.
Nutritional yeast.
I like it with high in vitamin D.
Good for you. Okay. If you want any more, plenty here. I'll be eating popcorn on my desk for the next 2 days. You'll need. All right, we're ready.
The floor is yours.
All right. You know, we're all right. All right. Well, thank you for having me come here and speak with you. I'm here to talk to you all about a very important issue, if not a particularly riveting one, and that is public records law in the state of Wisconsin. So, Wisconsin public records law is controlled by a number of statutes in section 1931 to 19.39. And also make sure you can follow along if you want. I've provided these slides to you for your convenience. So what is the purpose of open records and open meetings? Well, in the state of Wisconsin, our legislature has determined that it is very important to shed lights on the internal workings of our governmental bodies, you guys. This has other effects like encouraging the public to be an informed electorate. And some even say that it is the foundation of a democratic society, providing the opportunity for public to carry some oversight over their elected officials. So first I'm going to talk to you about open records requests. Basically this process is a request is received, you do a search for the record, you review the records and determine whether there is a statutory exemption for disclosure, apply a balancing test, and then you release the record to the requester with a letter explaining any possible redactions and or withheld records.
question. Do we get to ask questions while you're talking, or should we wait?
I'm gonna just say hold until the end. There's two sections, one's records, one's meetings. If you have a question, I'll probably get to it
Okay.
within my meandering presentation.
Got it.
So, right off the bat, with public records, there's a presumption that every record is available to the public. The public records law shall be construed in every instance with a presumption of complete public access consistent with the conduct of government business. So the spirit of this law is if there is a record of something pertaining to government business, there is a presumption in the law that people can request it and receive it. The denial is generally contrary to public interest. However, there may be things that may outweigh the public interest to constitute a denial. When we're talking about public records requests, I should maybe give you the roles. The first role is the authority. That is you guys. You are the authority, this City of Washburn Council. The legal custodian of the records, who's the leader here? Who's in charge? You?
I'm running the meeting, I guess, if that means I'm in charge.
So unless you have designated a legal custodian, then you are the responsible for responding to records requests.
For the council in particular,
Yeah, well,
not for the city operations.
the city council is for city operations, except for I believe the police department has their own records person. I believe it is the law enforcement. Yeah, the legal custodian for law enforcement records is always law enforcement. But yes, for the city and the city council, it'd be you.
Isn't this one of those things I pawned off on you, Scott?
You can designate, or
Designation and delegation.
it's the leader or a designated person.
You're designated.
And then the other player is the requester, which could be anybody. So when we're talking about records requests, what is a record? Now, this is the area where you guys should pay extra attention because this is where you can get into trouble. What is a record and what is not a record? What do you need to keep? So a record, according to the statute, is any material on which written, drawn, printed, spoken, visual, or electromagnetic information or electrically generated or stored data is recorded or preserved, regardless of form or characteristics. So a record is almost anything. The recording of this meeting is a record. The decisions that you make are a record. The gentleman here keeping the minutes is creating a record. Almost everything is a record.
Mary just made a record.
No,
It's not.
that's just a note.
It's not a record. Are you gonna get to that?
I'm just getting
All
to
right.
what isn't a record, and that is drafts, notes, and preliminary documents. So those works in progress or those questions that you're going to ask the legal intern that you may or may not be able to answer, those are not records. Published material available for sale at a library. I don't know if this is applicable to the city, but somebody can't just open records request something that they would ordinarily have to pay for. Purely personal property, you can't open records requests, I don't know, articles of your clothing or stuff of that nature. And then the last thing is material with limited access rights, such as copyrights or patents. I don't know if y'all deal with that very often. What is a record? Again, lots of things. Things that are not created by the authority, but in the authority's possession are still records. So just because the council or the city did not make something, but there is an official piece of government business that is a record that is obtained by the city or the city is keeping, that is something that somebody can request from the city. Something that else is a record, and this is very important, personal email, texts, calls, and documents on an authority's account. Those are records, but they may or may not be you may or may not have to disclose those. I'll get more into that a little bit later. And then business email, text, calls, and documents on personal accounts. So generally, because open records law, it's about government records, records pertaining to government business. Just because it's a personal account, if you're doing business for the government, that is a record. That is very important. Other things that are records, data, databases, maps, charts, social media posts, potentially. Contractors' records, surveillance camera video, and again, because law enforcement has their own custodian, this may not be applicable, but police body camera and dash cam videos. So, that important part, personal emails, calls, and documents on an authority's account. I do not know if you have personal or emails or cell phones in the city, but if you do, email sent or call sent and received on those official accounts are a record. This includes purely personal records. However, with those purely personal records, disclosing them is generally not required. But again, it's if it is actually personal and not pertaining to government business. Government business emails, calls are almost always records, but it's, again, content-based. Electronic records, I had went through hours for access. So if you maintain regular office hours, then public access to the records is permitted during those office hours. If there are no regular office hours where the records are kept, you must provide access upon at least 48 hours written or oral notice of intent to inspect a copy or inspect or copy record or establish a period of at least 2 consecutive hours per week during which access to records of the authority is permitted. So access to records is important, and thinking about when we're open or how we can provide the notice to people that they need to contact us for notice is important. So submitting a request. How do people do it? They can do it in any way that they want. It can be written or oral. During my time at the firm, I have done both. The requester does not need to identify themselves. They do not need to state the purpose of the request. They can be as vague as they want, but they need to be reasonably specific as to the time and the subject matter of the request. At some point, an overly broad request becomes sufficiently excessive to warrant a rejection, but they have to be pretty vague. Magic words are not required. They can ask. There's a wide latitude of what you can ask. I would also encourage, if you receive a request that you don't quite understand, to follow up, ask questions in order to get the person what they want.
So they can be anonymous?
Yes.
Really?
Yep. It can be anonymous. They don't need to state who they are or why they want it. So you've received a request from some anonymous person or anybody. There's 4 steps to process this request. Does a responsive record exist? Is there an absolute right of access, or is access absolutely denied? And then applying the balancing test. But the first step, before we start on the first step, it's important to remember you must respond to the request. Even if it's something that can be categorically denied, even if it's something that you redacted, even if it sounds ridiculous, you have to provide the person asking for the request with a response, no matter what. So, does a record exist? You can only give what you got. So, only records that exist at the time of the request must be produced. You don't need to produce anything new. Requesters can't be lazy and ask you to make something at their behest. You are only required to give them records. You don't even have to answer specific questions unless the existing record answers that question. So your job isn't to make a brief, your job is to provide them with documents. So after you determine that there is a record, you have to determine if you can give it up or what parts you can and can't give up. There aren't many exceptions for access. Absolute right of access exists in only a few cases. Books and papers required to be kept by a sheriff, clerk of circuit court, and other specified county officials, or daily arrest logs or police blotters at police departments. I don't think that applies to the city council. Absolute denial of access. This is also controlled by statute, Wisconsin statutes as well as federal statutes. So the information related to current investigation of possible employee criminal conduct or misconduct, staff management planning, employee home addresses, home email, home telephone, and social security number. You don't need to dox yourself. Financial identifying information. So absolute denial of access, think about how you could get your identity stolen. You don't have to give that type of information out. And I would point you to, there are other statutes that control this that are federal. FERPA is one, that is the acronym that I'm forgetting. It has to do with federal education and parental rights. Also something I'm not sure if you guys deal with. But usually if there's information that isn't categorically prohibited from being released or categorically allowed to be released, you apply a balancing test where you weigh the public interest in disclosure of the record against the public interests against disclosure. And most of the time, disclosing it is in the public interest. But this is always case by case, fact intensive, no bright line rule. Blanket rules disfavored. I can't give you a general rule on what type of information wins this balancing test, although I will say it's an exceptional case where the balancing test weighs in favor of non-disclosure. If there is material or information in a record that cannot or should not be released, redaction is an option if part of that record is disclosable. Think about seeing a document with big black lines taking out certain information, redaction. So those non-disclosed portions must be redacted, but the redactions are considered a denial of access and are subject to review. So when you give the person back the record that they want with the redaction, you should explain that it is redacted, and they will have a chance to challenge that. Some special issues, electronic databases, if there are any. Direct access to electronic databases is not required, and the requester within reason may request a data run to obtain requested information. There's also this issue of metadata. Now, metadata is, think about a Microsoft Word document. There is data in that document where you can see the history of a document and maybe comments that people put in. This is called metadata. And that it is not clear whether that metadata is a record or not. There's no controlling Wisconsin precedent. There's a circuit court decision that held metadata is not a record because it's basically like a draft note or preliminary computations, but other jurisdictions have held otherwise. So in response to a request, you must provide a written response to a request. And you must inform the requester that denial is subject to review and enforcement action for mandamus or by application to district attorney or the attorney general. And the reasons for denial must be specific and sufficient. So you have to give them a good reason. The timing of the response is important, although there is no specific time limit. DOJ recommends 10 days is reasonable for a simple request. The statutory language is, I believe, as soon as practicable and without delay. So please don't keep people waiting. The notice before release is required in certain circumstances, such as records resulting from a closed investigation into a disciplinary matter, or employment-related violation of policy, rule, or statute, or records obtained by subpoena or search warrant. Think about a case where somebody would be adversely affected by that record being released because it's something sensitive like that. In those cases, the record subject, the person being identified in that subpoena or the violation of rule, can try to stop disclosure in court. Costs. What can you charge people to do this? The actual, necessary, and direct costs only. This involves stuff like copying, location, locating the records, mailing and shipping to the requester. You can't charge for redaction. So enforcement, hopefully you do not encounter this, but it's Wisconsin statute 1937. It's a mandamus action, a challenge withholding a record or part of record, or a delay in granting access to a record or part of record.
Did costs be hourly stipend wage?
Excuse me, ma'am, you should hold your questions till the end.
I am almost done with records. I
You're
got,
not gonna get to it. All right, I'll wait till the end.
I got 2 more sentences.
Okay.
Yes. The last thing I had to say is record retention. Retain your records, folks. After receiving public records requests, do not destroy that record until the request is granted or until at least 60 days after the request is denied, 90 days if the requester is incarcerated or committed, and no destruction during an enforcement action. Now I will take any questions that you have and answer them to the best of my ability.
I only had one. When you talked about costs,
Yeah.
can you charge like the person who's time, like the hourly wage for them to process it?
I think
You know
yes.
that one?
Yes.
Yeah, so what you can charge is the cost of locating the record, not of compiling it or preparing it. It's the actual cost of locating. So if you have a whole file room in the back and it takes you 2 hours to look through and get all the records, you can charge for that. And the Attorney General opinions are that that cost of locating is at the lowest wage of any individual who is authorized or responsible to get those records. So you can't charge your highest paid employee rate if a lower paid employee could do the same task. And a big cost that isn't recoverable or chargeable, as Cooper mentioned, is redaction. It takes a ton of time if you have to go, attorneys or anyone has to go through and redact, and that's not something that's recoverable.
Interesting.
Any other questions?
The only other question I have is, do we have some of these, have we gotten any of these open records?
We get these all the time. I would say that it probably average at least one a week. Some of them are very simple, some of them are very complex. We get but every 3 months, we get someone who wants electronic data, what have we purchased? And all the records of everything that we have purchased. We get another one who they want employee information, wages, and all of that stuff. So I always get the same email from the same person. So they want all that information. So we've got that one pretty much set how we
Ready to
respond to that.
Okay.
Others are, I try to take care of things informally if possible. If somebody just wants a copy of a contract, and they want something simple, just tell me what you want, here you go. Because I don't want to have to deal with the formal. If I can keep it informal, it's a whole lot simpler. But other ones are very complicated. They want historical data. We've actually in the past have hired part-time people to search council minutes from the beginning on particular topics. And that took them days to go through that. There's certain things I don't even know if we have. We get election requests, which those could be a little tricky because in most cases I'm going to pawn that off to the state. Just had one last week on that, where they wanted all of the absentee voter requests going back to 2018 and all of the proof of the residency requirements. A lot of that is going to be personal information. We're not required to keep that information that long, and those requests should be going to the state anyway. But that would take us days of just solidly doing that if we had to do that. So it runs the gamut. Some of them are very easy, but some of them are not, and they always come in at the worst possible time. So.
I have a question. can I delete junk email that comes to my mayor email address?
What is the junk email about?
Usually trying to sell me something.
That's not a record. It's not,
Yeah, okay.
it's not government business. If the junk email was,
Well, if they're trying to sell me like computer software, which could be selling me something for the city, you know what I mean?
could be. I'll defer to council.
I would say if it's just a mass email, you're probably okay for the automatic delete feature in your junk email. There isn't any discussion or opinion in the state regarding deleting junk emails.
Okay. And then one step further, so before I became mayor, there was this mayoral Gmail account that has signed up for, some like community platform, and I get notifications all the time from that community platform. Is like a notification of activity on a community platform something I can just delete, or?
If it's sent to you via email, it's a communication, and that's a record. And it should be retained.
All right,
So,
I've been retaining them.
and as far as timeline to retain, we have a record retention schedule. Cooper's advice, keep everything. That's the best advice.
Sure.
Communications, correspondence need to be kept for 2 years. Certain other things need to be kept for different periods of time, but for everyone's general purpose, just keep everything. And that is true even after your term is up. Even if you're no longer on council, you can't delete all of your emails and everything else that was related to your time on council. For at least 2 years. I think, are we in the process of getting?
Oh my God, if they could ever just, we're waiting for this software company to take our money and do what they're supposed to do, but they're the slowest. So eventually we'll get to this new email, which will be a little easier.
And then there'll be a council email that's linked to your specific ward. And what I do when I have my personal emails or a city email or things like that, because people know you, it's a small community, they're gonna email your personal email still.
All the time.
Forward that to your city email and reply from your city email. Because then that's saved in your city email account. So that then when your term is up, the next alderperson for Ward 2 comes in, and there's that record there, it's still there. So if you do get those correspondence from somewhere else, forward them to some email you're gonna keep. Yeah, questions?
Go ahead.
Or there's one question on Mary with a note. If you take notes, those are not records, but if I took a note and I passed it to Tom, that's a communication then, and then that's a record. So if you do pass notes during meetings, those are supposed to be retained.
No
2 years.
passing notes during meetings.
I don't sit by Mary anymore. Until I pass them.
For individual council members, any request comes to the custodian of records, who is the person responsible for keeping those. Realistically, for council members, most open records requests you're gonna get are gonna come to Scott or Mary or Tony or I. And then we'll put out a request to have you guys compile these records to give to us. The only thing realistically that you may get directly is a request for some of your communications. My recommendation is always bring that to Scott if you have any question. As Scott usually does, so he can just, if it's not a problem, say, oh yeah, here you go, you can hack it. If you don't have any concern, but if there's any question at all, bring it to Scott.
So that leads to my next question. Social media is a record if it's business related, so like someone's personal social media account.
If you, like we're talking about communications, if you on your social media account DM some other person about city business, that's a record. if it's your own social media account and you are communicating with people about stuff that is city business, that is not a record. But so social media is just a medium, right? So communications, it could be a note passed, it could be a social media message. Other things that are records on social media, I suppose if the city has a Twitter account or something like that, those are all records. If you conduct any city business via social media, those are records. But yeah, you posting on Twitter your own account about stuff that isn't related at all about the city is not a record.
As long as we're on that topic of social media, we don't have a Twitter account. We don't want to do a Twitter account.
Sure.
That's a whole other thing.
What about Threads?
No.
TikTok dances, Scott?
No. We're going to, so we have several city Facebook accounts. Tony does this, and we have, because those are all records that are created, and people will post and delete and so forth on those, and sometimes we make a mistake, we edit it. But we do have a software that we pay for that captures everything that goes on our Facebook page, whether you delete it or not. It has been captured, and we can go back and look at that. So that and those are just on the city. So our main Facebook page, police department has a Facebook page, library, mayor. So just so everyone is aware.
Oh, yeah. You haven't seen it? I'm wearing my top hat and everything on my profile.
Do not follow your Facebook. But like, I often will forward something, very, very often. I'll take some of Tony's things and say, hey, come to the support meeting, you know, so that would be a record.
Yes.
Because I'm forwarding and commenting on city business.
And you don't need to do anything necessarily to retain that record on social media. You just shouldn't actively delete it.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
It's noted who shares it, but any comments that would occur from the share would not be.
Okay.
And one other thing I just want to point out that comes up sometimes. If anyone you talk to or anyone's interested in doing business with the city, oftentimes they'll get people saying, hey, inquiring about development or a property or something. An outside individual's request to be kept confidential doesn't prevent that from being disclosed as an open record. So if someone wants to submit an email or a bid or something to say, hey, I'm interested in developing this property, but don't tell anyone, because I don't want them to know what I'm going to bid here. That's still a public record. Their request to remain confidential it has a little weight in the balancing test, but for the most part, that would have to be disclosed if someone requested it. So if you do talk to people in the community, talk to anyone, hear someone's interested in some confidential discussion or proposal, just talk to them. Don't have them put it in writing, otherwise it's very well that could have to be produced.
So, a couple questions here. What do you do with ad hoc committees that are apart from the city council, but yet discussing things like asking Scott about land or something? Or discussing various political moves?
Your question, John, is a committee that is not an official city committee, but an outside group of people?
Yes.
Is this a segue into open meetings now?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, let's go. Let's do it.
The next segment is about open meetings, and it will probably answer that question. Anybody want some more calories before I start gathering again?
Whatever's got little stuff you want. I had to refill my water. Because I got popcorn and I brought the beer. How dare you? I know, right? So, you can go. You're good.
I'm good, I can hear you.
Yep.
All right, so the other important part of this is open meetings. So similarly with open records, Wisconsin Opens Meetings law is trying to simply accomplish the fact of having a government that is as transparent as possible. So what is required to fulfill the Opens Meetings law? A governmental body, city council, must give advance public notice of each meeting and conduct all of its business in open session unless an exception to the open session requirement applies. Those are the two requirements, basically, of Wisconsin Open Records law. So when does the law apply? Every meeting of a government body. So a government body is a council. That's you guys. But what is a meeting? The statute has a lengthy definition of meetings that basically says a convening of members of a governmental body for the purposes of exercising the responsibilities of that body. So seems pretty straightforward, but there is a numbers requirement. So the statute, there's a purpose to engage in business requirement, but the numbers requirement is a little less straightforward than the purpose requirement. The numbers are satisfied anytime there are enough body members to control a body's course of action. So there is a rebuttable presumption where when more than half of you meet, then that the purpose is for exercising the responsibilities of the government body, but you don't need half in order to have sufficient numbers per the statute. There could be something called a negative quorum, where although there is not a majority of people, there are enough body members present to block a course of action. So if there's enough numbers for a veto, that would be enough to have a meeting. So again, a meeting is if there is purpose to engage in government business, and if there's more than half of you, there's a presumption, it can be rebutted, that that purpose exists, and having sufficient numbers. So when members are conveyed, it's not solely when you are physically in the same location. I think that Zoom in 2020 have taught us all that it's perfectly fine having a meeting when we're not sitting next to each other. So telephone calls are covered if there are a sufficient number of people as previously described. Group telephone calls, Zoom meetings, obviously. Snail mail is not a meeting. Dissemination of written documents among the body is not covered by this law. This one is tricky. An email exchange might be a conveying of members if there is a rapid back and forth exchange among a sufficient number of members. Basically, the rule of thumb is if it resembles an in-person discussion, then it could be a meeting. So two of you talking to each other, generally you can discuss government business, but once you hit that reply all button, you might be in trouble. Walking quorums. So this is kind of similar to that note passing scenario we discussed. A walking quorum is when a series of gatherings among separate groups of members of a government body, each less than a quorum, tacitly agree to act uniformly as a quorum. So think about signing a document among a small group and then passing it on to another small group and another small group. That could be something that's called a walking quorum. We have a meeting. And when a quorum of members for one body attend a meeting of another body in order to engage in governmental business in a subject that they have authority on, two meetings occur. So if the members of this body go to the meeting of another body and the subject of the other body is something that you have authority over and you're attending that meeting for the purpose of governmental business, that's a meeting within a meeting. A little meeting section there. All right, so we got a meeting. What now? You need notice. So the chief officer or designee gives notice to the public, news media that has requested notice, and an official newspaper designated by statute, or if none exists, a news medium likely to give notice to the area. Now, the newspaper, you're not required to pay for the notice, nor is the newspaper required to publish. A good idea is posting notices in 3 places around town where the public is likely to see them. The notice must contain the time, date, place, and subject matter of the meeting, including any matter for consideration at a closed session. How specific the subject matter description must be is highly case specific, depends on what's reasonable under the circumstances. That's my favorite word, reasonable. So generic descriptions such as old business, miscellaneous business, staff comments, agenda, revisions, those are all sufficient. That's not good enough notice. And you need at least 24 hours notice unless for good cause such notice is impossible or impractical. In this notice, you need not say whether action will take place. You cannot discuss additional topics that were not in the subject matter of the notice. There is no requirement that a body must follow the agenda in the order listed on the meeting notice unless an item has been noticed for a specific time. And you are not required to actually discuss every item contained in the public notice. Open session requirements. Every meeting of a government body must be initially convened in open session. All open sessions have to be accessible to the public and should be held in public spaces like the one that we're standing in right now. The law prohibits meetings on private premises that are not open and reasonably accessible to the public. No smoke-filled rooms with brandy and cigars. Meetings should be held at location near to the public the body serves, like here. Meetings can be filmed and recorded, and turning people away due to overcrowding is permissible. I'm sure that happens a lot. Generally, bodies are not required to allow members of the public to speak unless required by statute, but public comment periods are allowed. Also, disability access should be considered for locations. This one looks okay. Ballots. Generally, votes must be recorded. Secret ballots are not allowed. Voice vote or show of hands is impermissible unless the vote is unanimous and the minutes reflect who is present for the vote. The body must create and preserve a record of all motions and roll call votes at its meeting. This applies to open and closed sessions. Written minutes fulfills this requirement. Making decisions by general consent is typically only appropriate for routine procedures such as approving minutes or adjournment. So going into closed session, when is it permissible? So you have to start in open session. There's the same notice requirements. Before the motion to convene in closed session is brought, the chief must announce and record the nature of the business to be discussed and the relevant statutory exemption. This cannot be a statute number, but a specific reason. The body has wide discretion. Who was able to attend a closed session? Thank you for allowing me to attend the previous closed session. Voting should be done in open session unless the vote is an integral part of the deliberations authorized to be conducted in closed session. If reconvening, notice must be given. This can be done on the original notice of reconvening immediately after closed session. There's a couple statutory exemptions for what is permissible to discuss in a closed session here. A couple of them, judicial or quasi-judicial hearings, employing or licensing matters, conducting public business with competitive or bargaining implications, financial, medical, social, or personal information is being discussed, or if you are conferring with legal counsel. Penalties, like open records, this is enforced by AGs and DAs. It's a civil violation, and if you knowingly attend a meeting held in violation of open meetings law or otherwise violates the law, you're subject to a forfeiture between $25 and $300 for each violation. And knowingly is not only positive knowledge of the illegality of the meeting, but also awareness of the high probability of the meeting's illegality or a conscious avoidance of awareness of the illegality. So no deliberately playing dumb. Are there questions? Max, is there anything that I got? Yes, question.
I have two.
Two
One
questions.
question is for you. One, there is one situation that I am aware of where a secret ballot is allowed. Do you know what that is?
Secret ballots are not allowed. Oh gosh, you're making me go in my in-depth notes here.
You don't know? I think I might know.
Maybe I might guess.
Uh-huh.
You know, you just said.
I did.
The election of officers of the body.
I was gonna say,
Ding, 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 ding.
Yes.
choosing the president.
Yes.
There you go. And my second question is, you're telling me I don't have to have discussion and action on every item on my agenda here? I can cut it down?
So that one is, if you just list the subject of the item that you're going to be considering, then you don't need it. But if you just put discussion, then it can't also be an action item. So if you list the agenda item as Parks proposal on the grant for building the yurts, then you could discuss and take action. But if you list it, if you specifically list discussion and not list action,
So,
then you should only discuss it.
so you're limiting yourself
Yes.
by saying.
But if you don't say what you're going to do and you just identify,
Yeah, then go
The
down
topic.
and just have the topic.
yes,
Then you can
then
do
you can do whatever you want.
Come on.
Yeah, I should have done a better job of explaining that. You can notice more and do less, but the inverse is not true.
Oh, that's good for you.
Well, I have to think if we want to change our practice or not. Generally, I put,
You're just gonna confuse it.
yeah, I generally put action on, even if I don't know if action will be taken, just to leave those options. So
And you don't need to say possible action then? That's what we always do.
But if you want to limit it to just discussion, I
Yes.
mean, I think that's a really
Yes.
important piece.
Right.
Like, you know, like,
You can't take action on it.
yeah, you can't take action on it. I think that's a good piece to use.
Another question.
Yes.
It says voice vote or show of hands is impermissible unless the vote is unanimous and the minutes reflect who is present for the vote. I think, don't we always do, sometimes we have a nay and then we just list who voted what? But is that not kosher?
I think what I was referring to was like unanimous, what was I referring to there? I think I
Does the vote
was,
have to be unanimous for, for a voice vote?
So I think that the answer to that is, if you can record how many were in favor and how many were opposed, then that counts as a roll call vote. And then you can identify in the minutes how many there were. I think that general unanimous voice vote is if there's a large body and you say, all in favor, say aye. And
A bunch of.
100 people shout out aye and everyone approves it.
So
You
the
can't,
school board meetings.
yeah. If you can't actually count how many are in favor and how many are opposed, then you would need, if there are any opposed, you need that actual calling of each individual.
So what I've done in minutes in those cases,
Yeah.
where I would say, motion passes, 5-3, and then list each individual council members that voted against.
Yes, that's appropriate there.
So I have a related, a question related to someone's public comment tonight, saying that I, as mayor, have no business at school board meetings. But if I'm appearing in public comment at the school board meeting, is it appropriate for me to share a proclamation that I've made as mayor?
a meeting requires there to be more than one person.
Yeah, school board meeting.
Right, but so what I was talking about with the meeting within the meeting was if you rolled up to the school board with additional members and the topic of the school board meeting was something within your purview, I don't believe you need to notice out that you will be giving a
And I guess
proclamation.
I didn't mean this is open meetings, I was veering off into another question.
I was gonna say, I don't think that's relative.
But
That's not,
yeah.
that's not open meeting question.
Right, that's not
Right,
relative to
yeah.
her.
That's not relative to the.
But you can ask that later to the lawyer.
My opinion is it's totally appropriate for you to do that.
Thank you, I thought so.
Yes.
I
Just wanted to
agree.
make sure. Thank you. I'm a person, I can give public comment. right?
Yeah.
You are?
If I can, the meeting where we do run into that on occasion is, and we try to have a statement on the agenda that there may be a quorum of another meeting, because sometimes we'll have issues. We've had joint meetings, or we've had members of Harbor Commission attending a plan commission, or vice versa. And you've got potential quorums of 2 committees at the same time, kind of a thing. So, but I also think we should go back to John's question. In your case, John, if you are participating in a citizen group, this is not an official city committee, you are free, in my opinion, you tell me if I'm wrong, you are free to do so. However, in the case, as I emailed out this morning, if there is an invitation for other council members to attend, then I need to notice that as a potential gathering of the council.
Does that mean 3 or more counselors there?
More than 2.
And we used to have that same situation when we had down at the Harborview Event Center, when they were doing like, what were they doing
Oh,
down
that
there?
branding thing.
And then they were just getting together and with businesses.
Yeah, the business alliance.
Business Alliance, and I would go because I was invited, and then Karen started showing up, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, we're starting to get a quorum here, and that's where we started talking about that a little bit. And then we decided just to limit who would go to it, so we didn't have to go through that, right?
And then just another, on that line, if you're on a committee that has no actual decision-making authority, like an advisory committee, that's not a government meeting, because you have no authority to do anything. We still notice them, I think, just to be safe and to give public the opportunity to provide input, but as far as requirements go, if there's no actual decision-making authority, if it's just a recommendation or body that can make recommendations, it doesn't need to be noticed.
Interesting. So we don't need to notice the fireman's dance during Brownstone Days, because that's a casual social gathering, even though it is fairly likely that we would have a quorum of our council at that event.
Just can't
One-
talk.
Just
to each
don't
other
decide
about
anything.
One thing that and I don't see you guys doing it, which is good, but I see oftentimes after public meetings, council members sitting around and talking. That's presumed that you're talking about official business, and that's an open records violation. Because realistically, most of the time we are talking about what just happened in the meeting. As soon as the meeting's closed, we should stop talking about meeting business.
There's been a couple times.
Yeah.
We've actually gotten better. It used to be worse.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like it's gotten better. It used to be.
Eyeballs.
Be
Be safe,
So, to
John.
answer Scott's query, I do not plan to attend that meeting, an open house, because I already know what's going on. I would like to suggest that other council members consider attending the open house so that they can find out what the thinking is. And so I'm aware that there are some rather stringent things being discussed in there that are going to be coming at city council.
What, open house? So an email just went out today about an open house meeting. There's a group of citizens that are working on the referendum.
Washington
We're
Forest.
working on a referendum to.
Washburn Forge had a WFP.
Oh, that's gonna be at the.
Library.
Right. They're meeting at the club with Craig Showalter on the 13th. And they're also meeting in at the library as an open house, for informational open house. And they are discussing some serious business.
I was gonna attend one as well, just to find out what's going on.
The one with Craig Showalter is a discussion, we're listening to Craig on economic development for the community, what comments are on some of his ideas and concepts and things. It's not anything political being discussed. It's just simply a matter of, so what do you think about Washburn? What can we do?
Is that an invite only situation?
No, it was open. I saw it on the chamber.
Yeah, it's open.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, chamber is part of that
Gotcha.
too, because the group WFT, listen, we did not decide that we were WTF.
There was another one of those too,
Yeah.
Wisconsin Tourism Federation.
And so, but the idea is,
Well, that's not what I'm.
so the circumstances are is that it's a matter of asking, looking at our situation here, those of us that are wanting to do some things and move forward with some of our own personal ideas, and we have to run through the city council anyway to get approval on what are some of the ideas that are potentially available. What are you thinking?
So-
That's one meeting.
So if this is a meeting that's happening, that the chamber is organizing, but it has to do potentially with city business, and there's going to be multiple city councilors there, should that be noticed? Because they eventually might take action on things that they're talking about at that meeting.
Gets back to what you were just saying, Max, if it's a body.
It could be noticed as a potential quorum being there. Ultimately, as long as you don't bind the city to a certain decision in that meeting,
None of that will happen. That's
Yeah.
not binding the city to
Yeah.
anything.
the only
Simply, what are the possibilities?
The only negative outcome that could come from it is that if somehow someone were to argue that the city was bound to a certain outcome from that meeting, that decision would be void because it wasn't in compliance with open meetings requirements. There are enforcement penalties, as Cooper mentioned, monetary penalties, but those are only for habitual and very blatant
I can tell you
violations.
very specifically what the topic is, and that
Definitely.
is, what do we do with our brand new highway out here once it's built? How do we build businesses along it, and how do we make this a business corridor? It's basically the question that is.
Sure. Any other questions for Cooper?
Thank you, Cooper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So I think, and just ask questions if you get any question about open meeting or open record, instead of waiting for it to become an issue. If you read the Daily Press, I've had so many issues with open records in Ashland County that it's been probably over 100 hours in the last 3 months on open records.
That's why we can never get a hold of them.
I know.
And that's why we're having the training.
Yeah.
And personnel records are
Yes.
our records. There's just some additional processes that have to be followed. So those can get tricky.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. No follow-up conversations. Hello.
Recording stopped.
Yes.
Could you
I'm gonna make sure I
the
get that.
confidential stuff envelopes get back to me? Sure. And if you have extra binders at home, please bring them in.
Where do you want to go?
You can stick it back where your stuff is.
Okay.